All right, welcome back to ABA exam review and our latest set of RBT exam practice questions. We're going through the set together and breaking each one down. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please like and subscribe. Check out btexamreview.com for all of our study materials, including our combo pack. As always, when you pass, please let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. Let's get going. After attempting other strategies, your behavior analyst decides that it is necessary to use a response cost procedure that instructs you to take away a client's tokens whenever the client uses bad language. Following a couple of days of this intervention, the client is now telling his mom he no longer wants you at the house. What likely occurred? Now, this is not uncommon when using a punishment procedure. And how do we know this is a punishment procedure? Well, because response cost by nature is punishment. Now, to be sure, right, that it's effectively punishment, we would have to know how the behavior has changed. And what behavior are we targeting exactly? Well, the bad language. Do we know how the bad language changed after the response cost was introduced? We don't. Therefore, do we know if punishment was effective? We don't. And that's the key when working with consequences, whether it's reinforcement or punishment. You've got to look at the change in future behavior. What we do know, however, is that following some of the intervention, the client is saying he no longer wants you at the house. Now, what could have likely occurred? A, punishment was effective. We just went through why that can't be the case, right? Or we don't know if that's the case. We don't know how the bad language changed, and that's the target behavior. If it decreases, yes, punishment was effective. If it doesn't change, punishment was ineffective. We can't be sure. It's not given to us in the question. Same with B, punishment was not effective. We can't say for sure, so we can't pick this answer. What about C, the tokens became inaversive? Well, the client wasn't talking about the tokens when he said, I don't want them at the house. He was talking about you. So what likely happened is, as you started using response cost, you started being paired with this punishment procedure, and therefore, as you're giving punishment, you're becoming more and more aversive to the client. This is one of the main reasons we need to be careful when using punishment, and one of the reasons ABA is reinforcement driven. There are a lot of things that can go wrong when using punishment. In this case, what likely occurred is you became an aversive. You're observing your teenage daughter for 20 minutes. You note that she picked up her phone after 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 8 minutes, 13 minutes, and 18 minutes. What is the average inter-response time for picking up the phone? A behavior is picking up the phone. Always identify the behavior. And we're looking at inter-response time, specifically average. And you have to know how to find averages. So how are we going to find the average inter-response time? Well, first, let's look at all our different inter-response times. So between 2 and 5 minutes is our first one, which is 3 minutes. Between 5 and 8 is, now we have a total of 6 minutes. Between 8 and 13, right, we have a total of 11 minutes. And then between 13 and 18, we now have a total of 16 minutes. So our total inter-response time is 16 minutes. How are we going to find an average? Well, we're going to divide that total by the number of data points. And we have 1 data point, 2 data points, 3 data points, 4 data points. So we're going to divide 16, which is our total, by the number of data points, which is 4, and we're going to get 4 minutes. So there's a couple of different things going on in this question that you need to be aware of. You've got to know how to find averages, and you've got to know what inter-response time is. And that's why you've got to work on measurement in this context, right? Because as you get fluent, it's going to become very easy for you to identify the different types of measurement, but it doesn't end there. You need to know totals. You need to know averages. Sometimes you need to know percentages. So this question is testing you on your knowledge of averages and your knowledge of, can you identify the inter-response time? You attempt a paired choice preference assessment, but your client will not take any items from you. You switch to a free operand preference assessment instead. How will you measure preference using this method? We've got a preference assessment question. Specifically, what type of preference assessment are you using? Well, a free operand, right? You tried paired choice, forced choice, but the client wasn't taking items. When using a free operand preference assessment, how do you measure preference. How do we do that? Well, first, what is free operant? It's when we're just letting the client engage with the environment. We're not contriving anything. We're not introducing anything. We're just observing. That's free operant. And so how are we going to measure preference using this method? A, offer your client one item at a time and record how long they engage. Well, we're not going to do that. One, that's a single choice assessment. And two, we've just tried that and they don't take items. So A is just not a good answer. B, offer your client multiple stimuli at the same time and remove each item the client engages with. Again, we're not contriving this, right? We're not offering the client anything. We've tried this already. The client isn't taking items. We need to try something else. So C, observe the client in their environment. That's the free operant piece. And record how long they engage with an item. And that's how we're going to record a set or preference using a free operant assessment. We're going to observe the client in the environment, free operant, and record how long they engage. That is our measurement procedure. Marcia has a long to-do list for the week. She wakes up early on Monday so that she can get started. Each time she finishes a task, she checks it off from her list and she keeps working. What is driving Marcia's behavior? So we're looking at whose behavior? Marcia's. And the question is asking what is driving Marcia's behavior? Essentially, why does Marcia continue to engage in this behavior, right? She's got this to-do list, and so she wakes up early on Monday to get started. When she finishes a task, she checks it off. So she has an antecedent of a task. The response is she completes the task, and the consequence is she checks it off from her list. Basically, what has she done? Well, she's taken that task away. That task is no longer an issue. It's been removed. Marcia has escaped the task, essentially. And so when we're removing something, is that positive or negative? Well, that's going to be negative. So we can safely say this is likely negative consequence. And then we ask ourselves, is Marcia's behavior continuing? Well, yes, because she's continues to do this, right? She's finishing a task, she checks it off. She finishes the task, she checks it off. So her behavior is at least maintaining, if not increasing. Therefore, there's reinforcement involved. So we've got taken away, right? She's removing the task, it's negative, and it's increasing and maintaining the behavior, which is reinforcement. So what is driving Marcia's behavior will be negative reinforcement. Hayden picks up a piece of paper, rips off the corner, and puts it in his mouth. When his dad reaches for his mouth to take it out, Hayden starts laughing and running away. Hayden's dad gets frustrated and takes away the paper from Hayden. What is likely the function of Hayden's behavior? So we're looking at functions. What are our functions? Attention, tangible, escape, automatic. Automatic also sometimes referred to as sensory. And we're looking at Hayden's behavior. So the function of Hayden's behavior. So let's look what Hayden is doing, right? He's picking up paper. He's putting it in his mouth. When dad reaches for the mouth to take it out, Hayden laughs and runs away. Hayden's dad then gets frustrated and takes away the paper from Hayden. So in order to identify the function, what we want to look at is, because the function is just what is the effect on the environment, essentially, and what is occurring, and what is maintaining this behavior, and what is Hayden getting out of this, right? Because behavior typically happens to get something or get rid of something. And here Hayden is getting something. What is he getting? Is Hayden actively trying to seek out the paper? Well, not necessarily. That's just kind of the vehicle for what? Because the behavior we're looking at is putting it in his mouth. What happens is when his dad reaches, Hayden's laughing and running away. Hayden's dad gets frustrated and takes away the paper from Hayden. So Hayden is really getting all this attention from his dad for all of his behavior. If we look at A, that's what we're looking at, but we never stop, right? We've read all of our answer choices. And so B, tangible, well, Hayden is not, the consequence isn't Hayden getting something. If anything, the paper is being taken away from Hayden, right? Hayden's not looking to gain the paper. That's not the consequence of this, right? He's getting all this attention from his dad. C, escape. There's no obvious event or stimulus that Hayden would be escaping from. And we know it can't be automatic because his dad is involved, and automatic is not socially mediated. So likely Hayden is engaging in this behavior for attention. It seems to be the most clear consequence for why Hayden continues to act this way and do these things. It's been 2 weeks since Greg started working on teaching a behavior chain to Tim. Tim is not catching on and is making mistakes throughout the chain. What might Greg try? All right, behavior chain question. We're making mistakes throughout the chain. And that's always an issue because mistakes lead to more mistakes. And when we make mistakes in a chain, there's a good chance those mistakes become part of the chain. Think about a activity you do where you're constantly making the same mistake over and over again. That's because that mistake has entered into the chain and is now part of the chain. And so since Tim is not catching on, what might Greg try to change this out, to disrupt all these mistakes? A, increase the amount of prompting provided to Tim. Sure, if your client is making a ton of errors, we need to do something different. Prompting is always a good idea to prevent errors. B, reevaluate the number of steps in the task chain. Absolutely, every task chain should be individualized and client specific. Maybe there's too many steps, maybe there's not enough steps. That's one approach Greg can use. C, consider the difficulty of the task chain and adjust as needed. Absolutely. Just as the steps matter, difficulty matters. We're looking at skill level, developmental level. What can they do? What can't they do? Different kids need different ways of doing some things, right? The chain is individualized. So Greg might have to prompt differently. He might have to reevaluate the number of steps, and he needs to consider the difficulty. So all of these things are things Greg can try to kind of eliminate these mistakes and improve Tim's ability to learn this chain. Errorless learning addresses which of the following issues? All right, speaking of prompting and eliminating errors, what is errorless learning good for? What does errorless learning do? Well, errorless learning is exactly what it sounds like, right? Errorless learning prevents errors. Okay, it's that simple. And so why do we use errorless learning? What does it address? A, the tendency for students to become prompt dependent. Yes, right? But does errorless learning address the tendency for students to become prompt dependent? Well, no, right? If this said errorless learning does not address which of the following issues, well, errorless learning is the most intrusive prompt possible. And so if we're using the most intrusive prompt possible, would the student avoid becoming prompt dependent? Well, no, it's not going to address that issue. It just might make that issue worse. We're using a very intrusive prompt. So there's a good chance prompt dependency actually becomes an issue. B, the idea that errors in learning lead to more errors. This is the main thing errorless learning addresses. The idea that when you make a mistake, that leads to more mistakes, and those mistakes and errors become part of your behavior. We want to avoid that by eliminating errors altogether. And then C, the lack of generalization from a client. Errorless learning, again, heavy prompts. We don't allow errors to happen. That's not going to avoid prompt dependency, and that's not going to encourage generalization. What it's going to do is hopefully eliminate errors that are likely leading to more errors that are likely becoming part of that behavior chain. Which of the following answer choices is not an indirect assessment tool or strategy? The key here is indirect assessment tool and not. So one of these is not an indirect assessment tool or strategy. An indirect assessment means what? Well, it means we're not actually observing the client. We're getting information and data some other way. So a survey given to the parent asking about the client's behavior change. Is that indirect? Absolutely. We're not watching the client's behavior change. We're just asking about it from the parent. It's secondary data, essentially. B, a checklist of preference items given to the client's teacher. Again, are we going directly to the source, the client? Nope, we're going to the client's teacher. That is indirect. We're looking for not. C, an ABC narrative recording procedure used at the client's home. So we're at the client's home, but is an ABC narrative recording procedure indirect or direct? Well, it's direct because we have to observe the behavior so we can look at the antecedents and consequences. So C is not indirect. And then D, a rating scale of how effective ABA is according to the client's speech therapist. Again, not direct, not directly observing the client. Indirect assessment from the speech therapist, not what we're looking for. If we're looking for what is not an indirect assessment tool. Well, that's going to be an ABC narrative recording procedure, because with an ABC narrative recording procedure, we're actually directly observing the client. Fantastic. Thank you for watching. As always, please subscribe. Check out btexamreview.com for all of our study materials. As always, when you pass, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. See you soon.